Um, Good afternoon, and thank you all very much for being here. I feel like I should probably start by saying that I feel very, very fortunate that English is a language that you all speak in common, because otherwise I was going to have to do this presentation in Finnish or Norwegian or Swedish or I don't know what. So I do not take for granted for a second that you all speak English, and that has made my life very easy. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I have come all the way from Australia, the lovely town of Brisbane, for those of you who know anything about Australia, where it's currently 37 degrees. So I'm very happy to be here in the cold. I am very excited also to talk a little bit about Newshounds, which is the media literacy program for primary school children that we have developed in Australia. Now, just by way of background, I've worked as a journalist for 25 years, or probably a little bit longer. I'm also a father of two, and about 4 years ago, it became obvious to me that my children were not being exposed to traditional media sources in the same way that I had been growing up. So newspapers were always laying around the house. The television news was always on when I was growing up. But my children, that was not the case. Newspapers weren't as commonly seen. If they watched television at all, they were watching YouTube or they were watching streaming. So as a result, they were just becoming less incidentally exposed to news from really reliable sources of information. And so we set up at that time a daily news podcast for children. The idea being that you would create a podcast every day which broke down the big news stories of the day, but in a kid-friendly way. So we would pick stories from what was happening in the world that we knew kids would be interested in, and presented it to them in a fun, engaging format in a podcast. And we threw that out and we thought, well, let's see how that goes. It now has about 160,000 Australian kids and their families listening to it every day, which is phenomenal. And about 5,000 primary school teachers also listen to this podcast every day. As a result of that podcast, I was starting to notice that my children would increasingly come to the dinner table and tell me about facts that they had picked up on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube. And I suddenly realized, okay, we need to create a resource that can go into classrooms that helps teachers to teach children to start to think critically about the flood of information that they have coming at them. Because what is true here is true in Australia and all around the world. And that is that children have more information coming at them today than at any other time in history. But I don't believe there's a single education system in the world that has made up for that, or is teaching to that, or is teaching the critical thinking skills that are required to allow children to start filtering information in an efficient manner. And so, with the help of the Google News Initiative, who initially funded us, we created Newshounds. Now, if this video works... It's a high-tech jungle out. There's more information coming at our kids than any other time in history. And not all of it is cool. I could probably... This is Squizzy the Newshound, the world's first internet detective dog, trained to sniff out fake news, teaching kids to stop, think, and check before believing everything they see online. Newshounds, a world-first classroom resource teaching primary school kids how to tell online fact from fiction. It's 9 podcasts and videos, comes with a classroom workbook and a comprehensive teacher manual in a virtual online game format, because we knew that we had to make it engaging for kids. And we have created this concept of turning children into net detectives. So Squizzy the Newshound is an internet detective dog. It's a cartoon character, and every lesson he goes out into the internet and he sniffs out mis and disinformation. Here's a bloodhound, so steeped in the tradition of Sherlock Holmes, he knows how to find mis and disinformation. So we gamified it because we knew that kids would become more engaged with it if there was some sense that they were playing a game. As they go through every one of the sessions that they do, they collect another piece of internet detective kit. So in the first session, they might get a set of handcuffs to arrest the impacts of misinformation. In another session, they might get a torch to shine a light on disinformation. And by the end of the 9 sessions, they become internet detectives and they become qualified news hounds. We launched the program, and it was built, I should say, speaking exactly to the point that was made by the 2 presenters just before me, we brought primary school teachers in to help us build this because we knew that there's no point building something that isn't going to work in a classroom context. So the primary school teachers came in and we came up with a pedagogy, and we came up with a clever way of working out how we can get kids to start thinking critically. Squizzy the Newshound has a 3-word mantra: stop, think, and check. And the entire basis, I guess, for the whole Newshounds program, and the entire reason we've made it for primary school children, so we're talking about children aged 8 to 12 primarily, is we've based it on the idea that if you don't get to kids and give them these very basic ideas around thinking critically and not believing everything you see online, if you don't get this messaging to them before they have a smartphone in their hands, then potentially you've lost them. So you want to try and, in the same way that we don't send kids to the beach in Australia without making sure they know how to swim, we don't let kids cross the road in Australia until they've learnt the basics of road safety. Why on earth are we letting kids out onto the internet without first teaching them the very basics of how to think critically about the information that they're coming across? So, as I've said, it's a podcast-led program. It's absolutely free, so that's also was an important part for us because we needed to make it accessible to as many people as possible. It runs as a podcast but plays as a video. It's all accessible via an internet, so all you need is an internet connection. Teachers tend to play it on interactive whiteboards or on television screens in their classroom. They download the classroom workbooks so that the kids have a workbook and they do the exercises with every podcast session. The teacher manual is set out in such a way and written by primary school teachers so that the teachers don't have to be experts in media literacy or the teaching thereof in order to teach every one of the sessions. So the teacher manual has teacher tips. In this session, we're going to be talking about what is media. We're going to be talking about who makes media. We're going to talk about why people make media and what sorts of influences they might be, or what sorts of reasons they might be making media for. So it's all been built, as I said, as a combination of myself as a journalist and primary school teachers. We launched it just over a year ago, and we had hoped we might get maybe 500 classrooms signing up to do it. Before I flew over here, we had actually just under 3,500 classrooms around the country who had started to become news hounds. We think that's around about 50,000 Australian children who are now starting to learn how to stop, think, and check when they're online. It was also important to us to make sure that that it was underpinned by strong academic underpinnings. And so we got the Queensland University of Technology to have a look at the program and to assess it. And so they did focus groups with kids who had done news hounds, teachers who had taught it, and parents of children who had been exposed to the News Hounds program. And one of the things we found, which we had never expected, but we were very happy to discover, is that children were doing News Hounds in the classroom, and then they were going back home, and at night around the dinner table, they were talking to their parents, and their parents would say, "Oh, I saw this on Facebook today." And the children were challenging them and saying to them, "Well, is that right? Because Squizzy the Newshound tells us to stop, think, and check." And so what you had, which we had never expected, but we were super happy to discover, was that children were taking the lessons they had learned at school and passing them on to parents. It's our hope that with the success of Newshounds for primary school kids, the next step will be to create a similar version of Newshounds, but for adults. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that seniors are especially vulnerable to mis and disinformation, to online fraud, online scams. We would love to use the same sort of template and the same sort of educational template that we've created with Newshounds to create a similar resource for older generations as well. We are in the process of having a discussion with government because now we've created this resource and now we have this enormous potential for it to succeed and to be expanded and to be scaled. We need some money. We've been funded up until this point very generously by the Google News Initiative, and we're very grateful for that. It's not a long-term solution. So we're having discussions at the moment with the Australian government about funding the rollout of Newshounds into primary schools all across the country. So we have an election coming up in Australia probably in the next 3 or 4 months, which we are hoping will work well for us because it's the sort of election pledge that plays very well to families. The subject of mis and disinformation, the concern that parents, that teachers have around the idea that their children are being exposed to all of this information and yet don't have the ability to tell online fact from fiction is very real in Australia, and we're hoping we're able to leverage that. To that end, a lot of my work in the last 12 months has been shamelessly dragging federal politicians in Australia into classrooms. And this is, none of these faces will mean anything to any of you, but the guy up in the top left is the federal treasurer. He's the one that has the money. We've had him in a classroom in his electorate because until you actually stand in a classroom and you see children doing Newshounds and you see the level of sophistication with which they speak about media literacy, with which they speak about the media they're consuming on a almost full-time basis on YouTube and TikTok, until you've actually stood in a classroom and seen that, do you actually comprehend the scale of the problem and the genius of the solution, I think, that we've come up with. There's been a lot of activity in Australia, as you'd be well aware, around social media. The Australian government passed legislation in November which will see anyone under the age of 16 banned from social media platforms in Australia. Now, that legislation doesn't come into effect until next September. There is a federal election between now and then. I don't believe there's any reason that that legislation will change. Both parties have indicated their support for the banning of social media platforms for anyone under the age of 16. The devil, of course, will be in the detail. And certainly the commentary is all around, well, that's great, and is a useful starting point in terms of helping parents, helping teachers, to start to get children off of these social media platforms, but how are you going to enforce it? To my knowledge, and certainly to the knowledge of everyone I've spoken to, there isn't a jurisdiction in the world that has yet worked out how to effectively ban children, or anyone that matter, from social media platforms. There's a lot of talk around age verification technologies, about whether or not they are effective. I don't know personally. I do know that my 14-year-old daughter, when we explained to her what was happening next year, she just laughed and said that TikTok thinks she's 27 anyway, so she doesn't actually think it's going to make much difference. But there is a lot of activity, as you'd be aware, in Australia, and certainly before I came here, I was in the United States, and was watching, as I'm sure you all were, very closely as TikTok was, or the ban on TikTok was upheld by the US Supreme Court, but then TikTok was given a reprieve by the new US president. So obviously a lot of questions are still hanging in the air as to what is going to be going on there. yes, ending on an uplifting note, I hope, to preserve democracies, we're going to have to spend a lot more time figuring out how we're educating our kids to sort out the difference between fact, opinion, falsehood, and what looks real, but what isn't. And I guess this is the other thing that I say to anybody that will listen, and certainly whenever I meet with any of the government officials in Australia, this is not a nice to have. This is, we're talking about preserving the democratic institution. And I know that sounds completely overblown, and sometimes I catch myself as a journalist thinking that's a ridiculous thing to say, but it's not. I think we are facing with social media, the advent thereof, these tech companies, and we're watching this play out in real time in the United States, even as we speak. This is nothing less than existential for democracy. And it's a civic duty, I think, and this is why we've focused on the government, and we've said to them it is absolutely the civic duty of any government to make sure that it has an informed citizenry, and one that is able to tell online fact from fiction. So there you have it. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, and this is really inspiring and a success case, and we certainly hope all the best for the efforts to gain like a sustainable funding, because I mean, I think that needs to be questioned when we be very critical to the platforms. I think the fundamental things, I don't have any problems of the platforms giving their fair share to kind of compensate the harms that partially they have contributed, some more than others, but the sustainably it has to be on the other track. And we even in some of the colleagues that might be online in 2018 addressed that there should be a way for pooling the resources from the platforms and then distributing it independently without even causing this type of claims that, oh, actually, did you see one of the big tech companies there? Even if it wouldn't make the difference, and I don't doubt about the approach. Yeah. So that type of sustainable things would still be needed. At the same time, I was very happy to know that the stop, think, check, that is very commonly used in Nordis. And I think this was very refreshing as well to get now the attention to the very young ones. We are more working with the teens and almost adult people at the moment, but I think you have both programs for that one. In Faktabari, we are starting a project in summertime, an EU consortium that focuses especially on the young ones, and we are very happy to. I believe I can talk on behalf of the colleagues who will be involved, but happy to check out these type of things.
Yeah, and I should actually add, we're looking for international partners to spread Newshounds into other countries. So if we're speaking at the moment with an organisation in India who are going to be taking Newshounds, and it requires a small amount of translation, obviously, and to the point of one of the audience before, some of the examples we use could easily be localised to make the material suitable to different audiences, but it's a project that we would love to work with any of you on. So please get in contact with me there, or have a chat to me afterwards. Because yeah, we're keen to spread it as far and wide as possible.
Thank you very much. Actually, I kind of lost my clock, as you can imagine already. So, Esa, tell me, I mean, are we already on overtime?
It's 10:05.
Okay, so we have a couple of time for a couple of questions before then we will wrap it up for the session. So, any questions to Bryce? And perhaps in waiting, you have been now traveling in Europe and all that, so contextually.
Yes.
Because we here want to believe that we are protected more, so to say, at least by the legislation to be implemented, even with the guidance of a Finnish commissioner that will have to battle there with the big tech pros at the moment. So. But how is the context in Australia? We have heard occasionally news that there's been a big battles as such, but from the citizens' point of view, how do you see it?
Yeah, I think
comparatively,
I think we're probably 5 years behind Europe and the United States. I've just spent 2 weeks in the US. I probably should have explained. I was awarded a Churchill Fellowship, which is allowing me to travel around the world and meet with media literacy experts all over the world. I'd say probably in Australia we're around about 5 years behind where you're at in Europe. We've had a very interesting couple of years with respect to the big tech companies. We managed to create what was called a media bargaining code, whereby the tech companies were obliged to pay newspapers, television stations. There was a fee that they were obliged to pay for a period of 3 years. That expired, and media companies are now in the process of scrambling again to have that renewed because they became so dependent on that money. The legislation obviously that has been introduced recently to introduce a social media ban for under 16s, I think, you know, that places us somewhat at the vanguard of dealing with the problem, although I'm not sure there's a huge amount of confidence that it's going to actually keep children off social media. And of course the concern very much is that whilst they may not go onto TikTok, they're kids. They're digital natives. They'll find somewhere else to gather. They'll find other platforms, and the platforms that they gather on may not be platforms that we've ever heard of or can in any way regulate. So that in and of itself creates some problems. And
Esa, yeah. Meanwhile, just on the AI part where we started, is the AI a hot topic, so to say?
Increasingly.
Is there something like you heard what Kari and the guys were telling you? So
absolutely, and amongst the educational profession, it's interesting that initially, and again, I have 2 children in high school, and initially you could see it was teachers pushing back against AI and being very much against its use. But I think there is more of a movement towards, all right, let's embrace AI and embrace what it's able to do for learning, but integrate it and just be a little more careful around how we allow students to use it, and the critical thinking again. I mean, and it all comes back to this idea of teaching children to think critically about materials that they are receiving whilst they're online. So.
Yep. Thank you very much. So we have a question here. Okay, please.
Thank you. I was wondering, since your character in Squiz Kids is again very much like an elementary school directed, but I'm here with a colleague and we're upper secondary teachers. So would you think you could develop the same thing really with this kind of same, I don't know, family of characters or something? Because that's fantastic, the whole character thing there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's as I said before, we've created it in such a way. It's a very modular piece of online learning. We can easily adapt the different parts of every one of those sessions and every one of those pieces of online learning can be changed. We could certainly create one for high school students. I think you would, I mean, this obviously is pitched at children of that age. You would obviously need to change the tone. And so much, and we've learned this from the daily news podcast we produce, so much of the success of these sorts of resources is about tone. And it's about speaking to children in a way that they will respond to. It's not about speaking down to them. It's especially not about being didactic and lecturing to them. It's trying to keep the tone as conversational as possible, as self-conscious as possible, and humour is incredibly important. Using humour is a really, really great way of helping to teach kids these lessons. Because if they're having fun, they're not also necessarily aware that they're learning something along the way.
Wonderful. Any other questions online or? Yes, please, Marianne.
Thank you. Marianne Paasi from Faktabari board. I have a question on your funding from Google about your experiences and how much money, but also. But
Not sure if that's commercial in confidence. I don't think it is. But no.
But also, does Google use your results for their own business model or something like that? So what is their interest?
Yeah, so I mean, happily, and this is completely honest. It's not like I have a Google boot on my neck. They have been very generous in terms of the money that they've given to us, and very hands-off in terms of they've had absolutely no input whatsoever into the formulation of the program, into the lessons that are included in the program. They don't have any editorial oversight. From Google's point of view, let's be honest, it makes them look good. It makes them. It's a way for them. When the government says to them, as it does regularly, what are you doing about mis and disinformation? What are you doing about helping to teach the next generation? They go, well, we fund this initiative, and it's in almost 4,000 schools, and it's been a huge success. So we've been. I mean, we massively appreciate. We wouldn't have gotten to where we are without that funding. And they have indicated a willingness to make sure that we continue to have that funding until such time as hopefully the government comes to the table. And again, you know, we wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't be standing here if that wasn't the case.
I think that's a pure pragmatism. In some countries, you don't have any other sources.
Absolutely,
and this works very much.
And I should add, we've made similar approaches to Meta. We've tried to engage TikTok, and they don't want to know about it. So, yeah.
And Australia has been a kind of a hard on the platform, so I mean, I've seen the games in 10 years, so of course you try to please the ones. So fair enough, a PR, but then good that it brings results like that. Then the question is like what Minna was addressing, that to what extent we can really apply that on scale, also in their platforms. And but as far as I understand, these are independent, do whatever you want for a while project. We can file that you've been giving amount of money and saying that at least somebody's doing, but this is not the sustainable way.
No, absolutely. It's not. It's enough for us to create what we've called a pilot and to have proof of concept. We now need to find a way to make this a sustainable model.
So the same challenge as well. Thank you very much, Bryce.